So I came across another video. This time it's about the hypocrisy of atheism. Let's see what they have to say about me.
This world is real because God upholds it by the word of his power.
Nice claim, but where's the proof? How do you know it's held together because of this God's power? What observations led you to this conclusion, and why should we accept them?
You've laughed because he gave you laughter.
Laughter is an emotional response. Like anything else, it's chemicals flooding the brain in response to both internal and external stimuli, such as stress relief. This is the cause of inappropriate laughter at what are supposed to be solemn events. The most common cause of laughter is what is known as comedy. Jokes are created to evoke laughter from the listener. The best way I've heard it described is that a joke creates a discrepancy in reality. The setup will determine the framing of the joke. The punch will attempt to subvert that framing. The listener will attempt to understand the subversion. If they can figure it out, they'll laugh in relief. Hey, that's accurate. Hurtful, but accurate.
Now that's funny because it's very cruel and humiliating.
Moving on.
You've cried because you're not just a bunch of flying molecules here by random chance for no purpose whatsoever. You cry at loss because love and feelings and emotions and joy and all these things are real because God designed them to be so. Why? Because you're made in his image.
No. Emotional reactions came about because they were, quite frankly, a handy tool for our survival. As one of the most socially dependent species on the planet, love and attachment meant that we cared about those close to us, especially family. Feelings of love made us care for the well-being of those around us that we cared for and depended on. That feeling that we had when we lost someone close to us taught us to protect our family so we didn't have to feel it. This was all evolutionarily driven. In the early days of our species, those that developed emotional bonds like love and loss would do better and outbreed those that didn't care about their family and community.
Richard Dawkins and all these atheists can say all day long that there's no purpose for in the world at all. We're just flying molecules, we're just stardust, and yet they weep when their parents die.
I'm fortunate that I haven't lost my parents. Yet. But I do know what the feeling of losing a loved one is like. We weep and are upset when someone close to us passes away because we've lost a person we have an emotional connection to and we're never getting them back. This is one of the reasons I don't understand why those who truly believe in an afterlife are upset when a loved one dies. I get that it's a blind spot on my part, and maybe I just don't get it. But if you think your loved one is in paradise, wouldn't you be happy that they're there and be in a hurry to join them?
This world is real, brothers and sisters, and it's real because God says so.
As always, very interesting claim, but how do you know this? Yes, it's claimed in your book that an omnipotent and omniscient creator being was the one that made the world, but what evidence do you have for this besides the reasoning that God wrote, or inspired the book? The book says that God is real, therefore God exists because God wouldn't lie about his own existence? You have no independent evidence to point to your claims being true.
Since the dawn of time, people have said there is no God.
No. Only since people started claiming there was a supernatural deity have others responded with, maybe you're wrong. Our ancestors may not have believed in a God, but they didn't disagree with its existence until others started saying there was one. True, but I'm always up for semantics.
They have viewed the same evidence that we all observe with masterfully crafted eyeballs set back into their fascinating facial structure, and yet they look at this same evidence that we're all observing and they say, there's no intention, there's no God, there's no design.
The design process you're referring to isn't any kind of planned design. The guess and check method of natural selection weeds out the organisms that don't fit into an environment as well as those that do. When we look out into our world, we are currently looking at a snapshot of life that has used this weeding up process for billions and billions of years to result in the diversity of life. Hold on. The appearance of design is due to this. As organisms get better and better at taking advantage of their environment, they fit so well that they appear to be designed, if you don't take into account the countless generations that came before it, each slowly changing to be better adapted to the environment they find themselves in. A basic light-sensitive patch would be an enormous boon to a simple organism. Over time, this would be refined through natural selection. Better ways of viewing the world would be passed on, while less useful mutations would be weeded out. And they're set back in the face because they're so useful to us that evolving a way to protect them is also quite beneficial.
Why? Because they hate him. They do not want to be held accountable to this God. They hate his holiness. They hate his righteousness.
I've always been confused by this argument. If people didn't want to be held accountable for their actions, they wouldn't just say that the person who would hold them to account doesn't exist. If I wanted to commit a daring casino robbery with a ragtag crew of misfits, I wouldn't just say, "Don't worry guys, the cops and judges don't really exist." I would need to find some way around them. If I didn't want to be held accountable for my actions, but truly thought there was a God, I might, I don't know, want to believe in a God that would forgive my actions if I just believed in him and said I was sorry afterwards. Huh. Does that remind you of anything?
You may doubt the Genesis or Jonah narrative, but your doubts don't change reality one bit.
This is true, but your argument is a double-edged sword.
Isn't that a good thing? I mean, you get twice as much sword. Who would want a single-edged sword?
Maybe ask samurais?
Yes, somebody's doubts do not mean the world is shaped the way they believe. I admit that I could be wrong, and as much as I doubt your claims, my doubt means nothing in regards to reality. But the same goes for you. You can believe as much as you want, but your beliefs don't make a difference in how the world really is either. That's why evidence is needed for your claims, and a claim without evidence can be dismissed incredibly easily.
Yet in that moment you are fulfilling his very word, clinging to lifeless idols, the presuppositions of finite men who talk about logic and rationale, but where did they get these things but from the God who gave them to him?
The ability to discern things logically came from our primitive, tool-using ancestors. We aren't the strongest or the fastest animals out there. Our only saving grace was the ability to use tools. This created a feedback loop. We used basic tools, which helped us evolve in a way to develop more and more complex ones. This required logical thinking and planning abilities. The ancestors who could think most logically about how to manipulate their environment were able to thrive over those that didn't, passing on the ability to use logical deduction. Logic wasn't given to us, but rather something that was developed to understand how the world around us works.
You doubt the Jonah narrative. You doubt the Genesis narrative.
Yes, and there's a good reason to doubt those things. Let's start with the Jonah tale. If you don't know it, this guy Jonah was told by God to head to Nineveh and tell people about how it was going to be destroyed. Surprisingly, he didn't want to do this, so he booked passage on a boat to a different city. Anyway, there was a storm caused by God, he jumped overboard to save the rest of the mariners, and was swallowed up by a giant fish, which then vomited him out a few days later. Now, this is usually changed to a whale, since there's no way to survive in a fish for any decent amount of time, let alone several days. I asked my science advisor if it was possible to live inside a whale for days, and the answer was nope. Thanks for being so concise. But yes, there are a few problems with this whale's tail. Alright. First off, there are two types of whale, toothed and baleen. Baleen whales will filter small animals like krill and plankton from the water, and their esophagus is nowhere near large enough to swallow a whole human, let alone vomit it up later. As for toothed whales, while it's possible to be swallowed whole by one, the fact that their digestive system contains mostly methane gases again shows there's no way that a human could survive any decent amount of time in there. That's one of the main reasons I doubt the Jonah myth.
Let me let you in on a little inside info. God hates it when it's referred to as mythology.
Sorry, As for the Genesis myth account, well, the fact that a literal reading of it puts its claim of the universe forming several billion years after we actually understood that it formed gives us almost 2.5 million times difference. Or, to put it another way, we've been creating tools for millions of years before your God apparently created the universe. That, and the inconsistencies with the narrative itself, make it somewhat hard to believe.
I assure you, you have a merciful Savior. He died for your doubts that stem from your sinful unbelief. It is sin to doubt God. And yet he is merciful to die for such sin. But may we turn from our sin and trust him and take him at his word.
And that's the problem. You're asking us to take you at your word that the word of the Bible is true. If you want people to believe and accept what you claim, evidence beyond just taking your word that your God exists would be needed to convince me and most atheists that I know.